One of the most popular questions I receive is, Matt, why do you shoot to Leica? Now, one topic I've never actually covered on this channel is the one particular lens which made me move to Leica back in, I think, 2013. So today's video is going to be focused on one particular lens, but before we do, I'll also quickly cover why Leica, and if I was starting fresh today, whether I'd still choose Leica or whether I'd go with a different camera brand instead. Hey guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. So yeah, before we get into the lens itself, I think it's quite an important topic of, if I was starting fresh today, would I shoot Leica if I was in the same position that I was back in 2013? So in 2013, I was shooting with big cameras. At the time, it was Nikon, and my goal was to have a small camera to use my small lens on my small camera. So looking at all the cameras today, the first choice I would probably think of is Fuji. But the problem for me with Fuji is it's APS-C, and I was desperately trying to get that full frame look for the shallow depth of field and all the benefits which come with full frame. If you've only ever shot with the APS-C, the problem for me with APS-C is you miss all the kind of juicy goodness, all the bokeh and all the interesting fall off on the edges of interesting lenses. And as a portrait photographer, that's the bit that makes the photos stand out compared to, say, a more standard boring lens like an off-the-shelf modern lens, which is sharp corner to corner. So that's the problem for me with APS-C, which is why I prefer full frame. So if I needed a small full frame camera on a budget, I likely wouldn't get a Leica, because at the time I didn't really have the money to buy a Leica. So I'd probably be looking at, I don't know, perhaps a small Sony or a small Nikon or any other small full frame sensor camera. Now the problem was, back in 2013, the Leica M9 was the only full frame small compact camera available because mirrorless hadn't really started. This video is going to concentrate on one lens and how this one lens pretty much twisted my arm to push me to Leica. I needed a camera to use it on for digital because I just couldn't shoot only film, as I covered in a previous video. Film is amazing, but you can't use it for all applications, especially if you're shooting for clients as well. So the lens we're talking about today is the Voigtlander Nokton Classic 40mm f1.4. Now you're like, Matt, it's not even a 35mm version, it's the 40mm. Why is the 40mm the special lens when Leica cameras don't even have 40mm frame lines? So with that, let's take you back to how it started with this lens. I've worked it out. I've shot this lens on 12 different cameras. So back in 2010, my first serious camera was a Micro Four Thirds Lumix G1. And during that time, I started to find lenses on eBay. And one of the first manual focus lenses, which basically taught me photography from start to finish, was the Voigtlander Nokton Classic 40mm f1.4. And then I used an adapter to convert it to Micro Four Thirds. And that allowed me to use a compact lens on a compact Micro Four Thirds camera body. I just love this shallow depth of field, and for the first time I was getting that 3D pop that everyone had always talked about. I even got one of my photos in a magazine. I think it was in Ukraine or in Russia. And my next thing with this lens was to try to do macro. So before my days of model photography, I used to shoot macro, and one of my first setups was by using a Raynox macro clip-on lens on my existing favourite Nokton Classic 41.4. And all of these photos here are shot with this same lens on the same camera with the macro adapter. Following that, my journey for photography, I needed a bigger sensor, so I moved to Nikon. The problem with Nikon is you can't use M lenses on a Nikon unless you reverse mount them for macro. Here's an example of shooting macro. After progressing to full frame Nikon cameras, I wasn't really feeling it anymore, so that pushed me to film. One of my first film cameras was the Voigtlander Bessa R3A. If you don't know, the kit lens for the Bessa R3A is the 40mm f1.4. So I was starting to enjoy a rangefinder system and this same lens, but I really wanted to shoot digital because, as I say, I just couldn't shoot film for everything. It just wasn't economical to do so, especially for client work. I needed something digital. I need to give a special thanks to Chris, because during one of my workshops back in around 2013, I was teaching with Nikon cameras, my D800 at the time, and Chris brought along to my model workshop a D800 kit and a Leica M9 kit, both with a set of lenses. During the workshop, he's like, Matt, have you ever tried a Leica camera? I'm like, no. So would you like to try it? I'm like, oh, yes, please. So he let me try his Leica M9, and this photo is the first photo I'd ever shot with a Leica M9, his M9. It was one of those transformation moments. I'd like seen the light No longer did I have to use this CMOS sensor Nikon D800. I could use this CCD sensor Leica M9. Now within 2 hours of Chris leaving, I was on eBay searching for used Leica M9s. I couldn't afford a new one and I couldn't really afford a used one. But as often happens with my photography, my raw passion for getting certain cameras or for getting a certain look, I had ordered myself my first Leica camera. That was the start of MrLeica.com, and that's where the name MrLeica.com came from. And so let's get back to the photos and see my progress after getting my Leica M9. I always know when a camera inspires me because I can take the photos of the most basic things and I still like the pictures. By this point, I'd got into my model photography a bit more, so this was kind of closer to the start of my model photography proper. I was already teaching more workshops and I was traveling a lot to Eastern Europe with my Leica M9 and with the 40mm f1.4 Nokton. All these photos are shot at 1.4. At the time, I'd pretty much shot only wide open. I didn't really see the point of stopping the lens down because I was desperately trying to get that shallow depth of field look. You can really see the high contrast black and whites from the M9 sensor. A lot of these photos were probably JPEGs rather than RAW. And at the time, I just loved that straight out of camera look that I was getting from the Leica M9. Let me know in the comments if you see a difference between the photos that I used to take and the photos that I take now. By this point, I was fully down the Leica rabbit hole. So these photos were shot with my Leica M2, one of the first Leica film cameras that I got. And then these photos were shot with the Leica M3. Again, all the photos shot wide open at f1.4. And these were shot in Hungary, available light only at the time. I loved the rendering, but it wasn't quite as sharp as the Sumlux lens, which I'd started to use. In addition to the full frame M9, I also had the M8. These photos were the M8, and you got really sharp images from the M8 sensor. The next camera I started to play with was my Leica M240, which replaced my Leica M9. These photos had a better low light capabilities and kind of a broader dynamic range, so you probably see less contrast, although with my presets I often add preset contrast in post, so yeah, maybe you won't see a difference compared to the M9 photos. Let me know in the comments what you think and if you can see any difference. Now my next camera was a brief one, the Lumix S5. I bought this instead of the SL, but then I realised it seemed a bit silly and I should be using an SL, so I bought the SL. I still have the Lumix, but I use it for video only. The SL is obviously my preferred portrait lens if you've seen any of my recent videos. I absolutely love this camera for portraits, but for travel, the Leica CL is still king, often overlooked by many people getting into Leica. Now the Leica CL is APS-C, so these are now crop sensor, but look at the images. I still think you can get great images from the CL. Last but not least, my Leica M10. Here are a couple of photos from Poland recently. I will do a full video showing more from this trip. So I think I owe a huge thanks to the humble Voigtlander Nokton Classic 40mm f1.4. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be here where I am today with the whole Leica ecosystem that now surrounds me if it wasn't the fact that I bought the Voigtlander Nokton 41.4. If it's a lens you've never tried, I highly recommend it. If you shoot mirrorless, I'd recommend the 40 over the 35 for the simple reason it's cheaper. The 35 is better suited for M cameras because of the frame lines, but if you shoot cameras like the Leica CL film camera, the Voigtlander Beta R3A, those have got 40mm frame lines, and so then you can use this lens instead of the 35. I actually sold my 35 and I kept the 40, so make of that what you will. Let me know in the comments why you shoot Leica, and I hope you enjoyed this fun little video. If you want to see a full review of the 40 versus the 35, I can link that next. And as always, a huge thanks to my amazing patrons.